More scratches. Her demanding nature actually endeared her to him, not that he'd ever admit it. It would ruin his reputation. As to how they came to be a pair, she'd been in the desert when he'd emerged from a 3,000-year imprisonment, sitting calmly on her haunches, expression haughty, clearly waiting for him to pick her up. He'd been carting her around ever since. At times, he felt like her servant. Ridiculous, of course, as if he'd ever serve a cat. Kitty glanced at him and blinked.
Don't give me that look. I'm aware of why we came, but I'd still rather be anywhere else. Maybe I'll get lucky and admitting I need help will kill me.
A man could hope, even if it hadn't worked in the past. Meow. Kitty uncurled herself and leapt from the high back of the horse to the ground.
I'll whine if I want to,
he huffed, slipping off his mount. How far he'd fallen. A dragon mage arguing with his cat, a cat who couldn't even speak. Used to be, Israfil didn't have to ask for help because he'd been a knowledgeable person with all the answers. But that was in the old world. Time passed while he essentially stood still. The modern world arrived, and he'd yet to completely catch up. For all he'd learned since his release, there remained much he didn't understand. Technology being a prime example. He still didn't grasp phones and how they allowed people to talk across great distances. And this thing they called television? Why watch a performance on a box rather than in person? Blame humans. Since they couldn't wield magic, they built roads, buildings, vehicles that could fly. The world was a much different place now, and the dragons he used to lord over had changed with it. His kind had gone from being top of the evolutionary chain to hiding from humans. They hid their existence because, apparently, dragons had been almost wiped out. Their own fault for banishing the dragon mages. He still couldn't believe their arrogant nerve. Even now, the descendants of his people refused to properly bow to the mages who not only beat them in power, but age. Their lack of respect would lead to Israfil teaching them a lesson about honoring their betters, but only after he got rid of all the shaitan. Nasty creatures from another dimension. They'd caused such havoc in his time. He'd lost many friends and family in the shaitan wars to the invasive race determined to bring about the end of the world. It might be an improvement, given the blight of humans upon it. There were so many of them now. What a waste of space. Why couldn't some tasty sheep or delicious goats have been the ones to multiply in the billions? He returned to the moment and tucked his cleave-summoning bone into his pocket as he observed the electrified fence in front of him. It surrounded the compound owned by the Silvergrace family, a sept of silver dragons who served a golden king. A king who wasn't a mage and who'd married a shifter. Appalling. But he'd not come to discuss their lack of etiquette or politics, but rather, "The chef is serving pecan pie, if you're hungry." The sudden feminine voice by his side startled. He'd never heard her approach, and neither had his cat. A discomfited Kitty quickly climbed Israfil to sit on his shoulder. He'd learned to not wince at the pinprick of claws when she did this. What he couldn't ignore was the woman who'd appeared, heavily pregnant, wearing a yellow frock. How had she suddenly appeared? She wasn't a mage, nor did she wear any invisibility tokens. "Did the cat actually get your tongue?" she teased with a grin. "I've seen it happen in a few of your futures, which reminds me, warning, don't forget to feed Kitty." At her words, he suddenly placed who this woman was, despite their never having met. He left communication with the lesser dragons to Gibrel, who appeared to have a fondness for one called Babette. He didn't pay much mind to what the modern septs did. However, this woman, he'd heard of her.
"You're the seer, Elspeth."
"And you're Israfil, mighty horseman of the apocalypse, also known as war." The seer beamed at him. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." He frowned.
"Why?"
It never boded well when a seer showed an interest. Just look at what Malik had done to the original 13 dragon mages. Claimed the world would end unless they agreed to be frozen until they were needed again. It didn't sound horrible at the time. The reality proved different than expectation. The frozen part only applied to